Welcome back again. We are staying on top of breaking news. A weekend strike in Afghanistan killing top Al-Qaida leader Ayman al-Zawahiri. President Biden expected to address the nation on this counterterrorism operation in less than 2 hours. NewsNation political editor Chris Steyerwalt joining us now to talk about this. So, Chris, we're just learning about this. Talk about why this is such a big deal.
This is a huge target, a high-value target for the United States. And by the way, people who love freedom anywhere in the world, this is great news. This is someone who had worked with Osama bin Laden going back to the early 1980s. He was a surgeon. He was bin Laden's top advisor, and he had persisted. And this is an even bigger deal for the Biden administration coming on the heels, as it does, their calamitous effort at withdrawal from Afghanistan. So this is some kind of proof of concept that the Biden strategy for Afghanistan can yield some kind of results. This is a big deal.
Certainly a big deal here. So he obviously played a major role in 9/11. We are more than 20 years out now. So is this about revenge or is this about counterterrorism? Talk about that.
Well, certainly, we don't prosecute. We execute missions. This isn't a legal undertaking for the United States. This is a national security undertaking for the United States. And much as it was in dealing with bin Laden himself, when Al-Qaida has what's the number one concern about Afghanistan and the crumbling nation of Afghanistan is that it would become a home for Al-Qaida again. And I am sure that al-Zawahiri and others looked at the chaos in Kabul, looked at the fall of the American presence there as an opportunity to do stuff. I don't know. Were they getting cocky? Was he moving out of hiding? And that was the opportunity for the United States to strike. But this is not only a wanted man for the wrongs that he did, but a person who intended to lead an organization that would kill Westerners, that would kill Americans, and would bring their evil ambitions to bear.
Absolutely. And Chris, obviously, we're waiting to hear from the president. He's scheduled to speak at this point in less than 2 hours. Right now we have very limited details, but we do know, that senior administration official calling this a successful operation against that significant Al-Qaida target. How big of a blow is this to that terrorist organization?
Well, I certainly don't know, and I suppose we don't know where they are right now because the situation in Afghanistan is very fluid. The concern, as I said, about Afghanistan is that it would once again become a haven for groups like Al-Qaida to stage attacks. And so this is certainly, I'll put it this way, this is certainly a moment for us to send a message to the world. We saw with the killing of bin Laden, we saw when President Trump ordered the strike against the Iranian general. We see this now. These are ways that the United States sends the message to the world that these bad actors, these truly evil, rotten people, that there are consequences for this. And so who wants the job next, right? Who wants to have the job next? And so let's say that there's a little disincentive at work here.
Well, Chris, you mentioned at the top of this the fact that the U.S. has pulled out of Afghanistan or pulled some troops out of Afghanistan. But talk about, how much of a threat does Al-Qaida still pose on the world stage here?
Well, what we saw in Syria with ISIS, what we've seen in North Africa, in the Horn of Africa. Al-Qaida is able and willing now to work with other groups, is willing and able now to go places that it previously might not have. The way to think about maybe Al-Qaida is once upon a time, it was the apex predator in the world of Islamist militants. It ate alone. It was not interested in working with others. Now, after the ways in which the United States has wrecked and ruined Al-Qaida, they have adapted. We will see what happens next with Al-Qaida. How will they change? What other groups will they work with? How will they shift their ambitions? This is a fight that Americans don't think about a lot, but I can promise you the members of Al-Qaida and those affiliated groups think about constantly. So this is big news for us, but it's bigger news for them.
Absolutely. I want to talk about what kind of message this is sending. More than 20 years after 9/11, the hunt is still on.
Well, and this is a long conflict for the United States. We're not accustomed to these kinds of conflicts where it goes on and on and on and on, and there's never a declaration of victory, and you don't get to say, okay, well now that's done. Because the reality, when you're fighting these Islamists and you're dealing with them around the globe, is that this doesn't end. There isn't an end date for this, and yes. It was more than 20 years ago that Al-Qaida shocked the world and shocked certainly the United States with their ability to strike us here. But since then, as we think about it, not just in Syria, but in other places, this war goes on. And it's a struggle that, again, Americans aren't accustomed to this. We don't think of our fights in this way. But this is the front line of the battle for American safety and for the freedom of our allies.
You know, and Chris, as we mentioned, we will hear from President Biden in just over an hour and a half. He'll be addressing the nation. We know that President Obama addressed the nation when bin Laden was killed. President Trump addressed the nation when al-Baghdadi was killed. Is this, would you say, on par with those announcements?
Well, I mean, obviously, bin Laden is that was the one that was up there with the capture of Saddam Hussein. It was a huge deal. This isn't, I would certainly say it's on par with Baghdadi. And it's a thing where this is a moment for a president who has had a very unhappy foreign policy experience, right? Not just the Afghanistan experience, but the struggle against Russia and Ukraine. And there's been a lot of success for the United States with our European allies and with NATO. And there's been a lot of good that can be said. But it's been a rough run for Joe Biden on foreign policy. This is a moment for him to say to the American people that yes, and he won't say it this way, but that yes, everybody knows that the withdrawal from Afghanistan did not go the way that it was supposed to and did not go the way that it was promised to, but that the United States can still reach out and take care of the enemies of our country and of freedom and these people who are responsible for the deaths of so many Americans, that we can still do that. That's an important thing for him to be able to lay on the line for the confidence of the American people.
NewsNation political contributor Chris Steyerwalt, thank you so much for weighing in.
You bet.
All right, now let's bring in On Balance host Leland Vittert. Leland, you know, this news breaking within the hour here. Talk with us about the significance of this. You obviously, closely follow foreign policy.
I interviewed his brother, Mohammed al-Zawahiri, who was basically the leader of Al-Qaida in Egypt at the time back in 2012. The big takeaway is that for as much as we think about Osama bin Laden, and he still remains this fixture and the figurehead of Islamic terrorism worldwide, Ayman al-Zawahiri was the world's #1 terrorist. He was one of the original terrorists. He was part of the assassination of Anwar Sadat in Egypt. And that led to what we now think of as modern Islamic terrorism in the Sunni blend, which was Al-Qaida in the attacks on the United States, everything from the Twin Tower bombings in '93, the World Trade Center bombings, through 9/11. Zawahiri's video, we're seeing one of the ones that he released. His video released on September 11th or September 10th of 2012 is what inspired the Benghazi attacks and the killing of 4 Americans. The blood of countless American soldiers who were in Iraq and Afghanistan, particularly in Afghanistan. Their blood is on his hands. They planted so many of the IEDs and so many of the ambushes of U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan. And to put a little bit of an added emphasis on what Chris said about how members of Al-Qaida are worried now and who's going to be next. There's always somebody who's going to be next. We saw that with Al-Qaida. We saw it with ISIS, and we'll see it again with Al-Qaida. But every minute that these terrorists spend worried about their operational security and their physical security, worried about the United States coming after them, is one less minute they have to plot attacks and plan attacks. And that's a very significant thing right now, this message. There was a killing of an ISIS leader a couple of months ago. This killing now of al-Zawahiri over the weekend continues to send the message to all of these terrorists: you're not safe. Therefore, you've got to spend a lot of your time every day worried about how to stay away from the United States.
Well, Leland, al-Zawahiri, I feel like not as many people, if they don't follow foreign policy, are as familiar with that name, but yet played such an important role in the deadly 9/11 attacks. Everybody knew Osama bin Laden's name. Why is that? Why is there that difference?
Well, Zawahiri was not nearly as public. He was the COO, if you will, of Al-Qaeda, not the figurehead. And you see it in corporations all the time. You see it in politics all the time. The mastermind may not necessarily be the figurehead. And oftentimes, it allows them to be much more effective. You think about it, al-Zawahiri lived 10 plus years after bin Laden did, which is a huge, huge thing in terms of not being as well known, not being as prominent, not having as many people talk about you, not having that kind of notoriety. And look, terrorism from the Islamic world, really since the fall of ISIS, has not been top of mind for the American people. And Chris made an excellent point about President Biden from a political sense. He today, when he speaks in about an hour and a half, is going to say, when we left Afghanistan, I talked to you at length about that America would retain what their words were, over the horizon, and listen for that tonight, our over the horizon capabilities to take out terrorist leaders. And this is going to be used as example A, 1 year after the Afghanistan debacle, that he still, and America still has that power.
Well, Leland, we only have about a minute left, but just really quickly here, talk about the fact, we pulled some troops out of Afghanistan, but obviously Al-Qaida still poses a real threat.
There's no question that they still want to pose a real threat. Every day, do Americans wake up thinking about Al-Qaida? No. And by the way, that's to the credit of the U.S. military and the U.S. Intelligence establishment. And one of the reasons, as we look at some video of Afghanistan withdrawal, one of the reasons they don't feel that threat every day is because the terrorists remain on the run. And that will continue to be the message, and we'll hear it tonight from President Biden, to those who wish us harm. We will come and find you. And every minute that they're spending worried about a drone overhead is one less minute that they can spend plotting attacks.
Absolutely. Well, our coverage will continue at the top of the hour. Leland Vittert, thank you. We'll be right back. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.